During that time, we've got a reading which is taken from a newly published collection, The Doll, short stories by Daphne du Maurier. Several of the stories were recently rediscovered by a devotee of the famous author in magazines and newspapers from the 1920s and 30s. All of them were written early in du Maurier's career, before she wrote her most famous novels. Well, the story that we're going to hear this evening is called The Tame Cat. It's read by Morven Christie. A young woman excitedly anticipates her arrival back home in London, where she hopes to be launched into society by her mother. She's blossomed in her time in Paris, and her reception in England is not quite what she expects.
It was difficult to believe that she had grown up at last. She had looked forward to this moment all her life, and now it had come. The little petty worries of childhood lay behind her forever. No more French. No more hateful plodding round the Louvre with Mademoiselle in charge. Already the life at the pension seemed dim and quite unreal. The child who cried herself to sleep because Mademoiselle had frowned was a stranger to her. A lost shadow. And the chatter of the girls, the little fierce intimacies of day-to-day, once so important, were now empty, nonsensical things scarce remembered. She was grown up. The wonderful things of life lay before her. To say what she liked, to go as she pleased, to stay at a dance until 3 in the morning, perhaps, and drink champagne. She might be seen home in a taxi by a young man who would want to kiss her. She would refuse, of course. And the next morning he would send her flowers. Oh, there would be so many new friends, new things and new faces. She wanted to fill herself with this warm, happy flood of excitement. "I'm grown up! I'm grown up!" The words sang in her ears, and the clatter of the train took the theme and thundered it loud, over and over again. "I'm grown up! I'm grown up!" She thought of the welcome that awaited her. Mummy, exquisitely dressed and more beautiful than ever, lovelier than she could ever hope to be, hugging her carelessly. "Darling, you're like a fat puppy. Go away and play." But Mummy would not be able to say that this time, because she had grown so slim since last holidays, and then having her hair water-waved had made such a difference to the shape of her face. The new dress, too, and the touch of colour on her lips. Mummy would be proud of her at last. What fun they would have going about together everywhere. This was, perhaps, the thing to which she had looked forward most in her life, being with Mummy. Of course, there was Uncle John. She could not remember the time when there had not been Uncle John. He was not really any relation at all, but it was just the same as though he were. It was at Frinton they had met him first, she believed, when she was a tiny girl. Uncle John had been part of the household now for years. He was useful to Mummy in 100 ways. It was Uncle John who answered letters for Mummy, who sorted the tickets on journeys and booked rooms at hotels. Although he did not actually live in the house, he was nearly always into meals. Yes, Uncle John was useful to Mummy, and rather a dear, quite old though, well over 40. Poor old Uncle John. What was it that one of the girls at the pension had said about him? "That your mother's tame cat." What a good expression, tame cat. Perhaps Uncle John was rather like a cat. A dear, harmless old tabby tomcat, purring quietly in a corner, never showing his claws, lapping away peacefully at his saucer of milk. Oh, they were going to be so happy, she and Mummy and Uncle John. And now she was getting almost too excited to sit still. The train was drawing near to Victoria. The great friendly roar of London, the rumble of buses, the yellow light of shops bursting with Christmas decorations. She stepped out onto the platform, eager, flushed, her eyes very bright and blue, her velvet beret on the side of her head. "Mummy, darling, I'm so happy to be back!" But something had happened. Something was wrong. Mummy was looking at her in astonishment, almost in dismay, and then as though she were angry, were afraid. "Baby, what on earth—" she began, but her voice trailed off uncertainly, and then she laughed, a little too brightly. "You've done something to yourself, haven't you?" And changing abruptly to a hard, careless tone. "I suppose you've got a mass of luggage. Go and cope with it, John. I'm freezing. I'll wait in the car." The girl watched her go, a little sick feeling of disappointment in her heart, and turned to the man who waited beside her, his hat in his hand, his eye on her face. "Hello, Uncle John." But why must he stare like that? The old sleepy expression gone and a new one in its place. Alert. Beady. Queer. It was so different from what she had expected. The breathless feeling of anticipation had fled, and in its place had come a horrid sense of staleness. It was something to do with Mummy. Ever since she had come back from school, Mummy had been cold, easily irritated, snappy with her. The first morning, when they had gone to buy the evening dress, Uncle John in attendance as usual, and she had wanted the lovely peach velvet with the low back. "My dear baby, don't be such a little fool. It's years too old for you," brushing her timid question aside. "No, Louise," to the attendant, "something much more simple in white." And then, turning round to Uncle John, "Well, what are you gaping at? I suppose you'd like to see the child dolled up like a tart." She had never heard Mummy speak like that. Quickly, shamefully, she whispered, "Yes, let me have the white," hating it in her heart, but she would wear anything if it would change the expression on Mummy's face. So hard, with peeved lines at the corner of her mouth. And then, when Mummy was not looking, Uncle John had whispered, "It's a damn shame. You'd look lovely in the velvet," smiling at her, patting her hand. "If you want anything, come to me," he had told her later that day. And for a moment she had felt like laughing. He was so much the tabby cat, sleek and well-fed. "Thank you, Uncle John, you're a lamb," she said, kissing him impulsively. When, to her surprise, he went dark red, hesitated a moment, then kissed her back. "We're going to be friends, aren't we, baby?" he said, squeezing her hand. "But we always have been," she answered, feeling for the first time in her life shy and uncomfortable, as though he were a stranger. Christmas Day was spent with Granny in the country, but after that the weeks stretched dully on until New Year's Eve. Surely nothing would happen to spoil that. There was to be a big party at the Savoy, a party given entirely for her. She prayed that it would be a success, this her first party, and Mummy would be the old Mummy, careless and affectionate, proud of her daughter so like a younger sister. "Please, God, let everything be all right," she whispered at bedtime. Mummy went to bed early the night before the party. She had her dinner taken up to her on a tray. She felt tired, she said. It might easily be flu. Her daughter kissed her goodnight and wandered, disconsolate, into the drawing-room. She sat down at the piano. It couldn't be flu, not suddenly like this, the night before the party. Sometimes she wondered if Mummy behaved like this on purpose, and for some queer, unknown reason did not want her to be happy. And then the door opened and Uncle John came into the room. He looked flushed and rather excited. He beckoned to her in a mysterious manner. "Come on," he said. Be a sport when the cat's away." Had he been to a cocktail party and drunk one too many? "What's the matter?" she said. Mummy's in bed, you know. She's not well." "Of course I know," he said. "That's why I'm here. Going to take you out to dinner." For a moment she stared at him in wonder. And then she smiled. Why, it really was rather sweet of him to think of her all alone. Where shall we go? She asked, suddenly happy. Could we go to a theatre? She ran upstairs, remembering just in time to tiptoe past Mummy's door. Really, she looked rather nice, she thought, glancing at herself in the long looking-glass. Uncle John, more of a tabby cat than ever, waited for her in the hall. He positively purred in satisfaction, tugging at his little moustache.
"You monkey," he said. "They've taught you a thing or two in Paris, haven't they?"
And this was what he kept hinting all the evening, suggesting she knew so much, egging her on to make confessions. But honestly, it was lessons and lectures all the time.
"Oh, don't tell me. I can see by your eyes you're entirely changed. A pretty girl like you wants to have a good time, and why not? I'll see to it, too, in spite of—"
But he did not go on with his sentence. He pulled himself up short, avoiding her eye. It seemed to her that everyone was smiling at her as they left the restaurant. They knew she was Mummy's daughter. I'm having a lovely evening. If only Mummy were here. He looked at her foolishly. Then he guessed she must be joking.
"I say, you're a bit thick for a youngster, you really are."
But she was not listening to him. She was looking around her, her eyes dancing, drinking in the new sights and sounds, already in her mind miles away from him and alone with somebody else, somebody new, somebody young. And now it was God Save the King, and they were crowding out of the theatre into a taxi, stopping with a jerk as the purple-uniformed commissionaire of the nightclub opened the door. What was Uncle John muttering? Something about it being damn slow after Paris? How obstinate he was! Almost a bore. For she was tingling all over with impatience as the band struck up, and it seemed as though 100 faces shone up at her. Bare arms, silver dresses, dark eyes, white shirt fronts, so much bustle and clatter and laughter. Now they were dancing at last, she turning her face to right and to left, searching the faces of the passing couples. And a boy smiled at her over his partner's shoulder, infectious, gay. She had to smile back. Surely they were both thinking the same thing. Why aren't we dancing together? She never even heard Uncle John whisper in her ear,
"You know, we'll have to be damn careful, baby, if she suspects there's anything between us."
Of course, it had to come to an end. She had lost all count of time, and she could have gone on dancing forever. She stood in the drawing room at home, saying good night, too full and happy to speak. He wondered why she was silent.
"What's the matter?"
Silly Uncle John. You've given me the most wonderful evening I've ever had in my life, she told him. Suddenly a door closed overhead, and steps sounded on the landing. Uncle John started, went white, then turned and seized her by the shoulders. His expression had entirely changed. Into his face something furtive had crept. He looked like a cat. A sly, slinking tomcat, crouching in its own shadow.
"She's heard us. She's coming downstairs. Whatever happens, we've got to put her off the scent. She mustn't guess about us, do you hear? We must lie like hell, invent some story, leave it to me."
She looked at him, bewildered. Why on earth should Mummy mind? She began.
"Don't pretend to be so damned innocent. You know perfectly well it's an appalling situation, oh my God." He turned away, fumbling with a cigarette, his hands trembling. The girl heard her mother's voice outside the room. "Is that you, John? I've had an awful evening. I couldn't sleep." She stood in the doorway and saw them both. The man puffing cigarette smoke, watching her round the tail of his eye, and the girl clasping her childish pink evening bag, twisting it in her fingers. Mummy had thrown a wrap over her nightgown. Her face was a mask of powder carelessly applied. Lines dragged to her mouth, and her eyes were puffy. There was no trace of beauty. She was just a woman of middle age who had slept badly. "Oh, Mummy, I am sorry. Have we woken you up?" There was silence for a moment, tense and frightening. And then Mummy laughed, a forced, horrible sound, her face as white as Uncle John's. "Ah! So I was right all the time. It wasn't just my imagination, all those secret looks and whispering in corners." "How long has it been going on for? Ever since you came back from Paris? You work quickly for a child of your age, don't you? You might at least have had the decency to go somewhere else and not use my house." Uncle John broke in hurriedly, the words tumbling over themselves. "My dear, I assure you, nothing wrong. Ask Baby. Begged me to take her out. I'm sorry for the kid. Wanted to stay with you." Little, short, jerky sentences, entirely unconvincing, sounding a string of lies even to the girl who stood at his side. But the woman would not listen to him. She could not leave her daughter alone. It was Baby who was false, who had lied, who had worked against her. The man was nothing, merely a shadow. "How dare you?" she was saying. "How dare you come back from Paris and behave like a cheap, third-rate girl off the streets? Directly you came home, I guessed what you were trying to do. I could see it in your eyes. You were determined to get him, weren't you? I've been told that's what girls of your age make for. They've got to have a man who belongs to somebody else. I suppose you think I'm going to share him." The girl did not answer. She could only stare back at her mother, physically sick with horror and shame, the realization of what had happened branding itself in her mind. Mummy and Uncle John. All those years, buying tickets, paying bills, all his meals in the house day after day, night after night. She understood everything now. Mummy, her beauty gone, a frightened, jealous woman, envious of her own youth, while he, smooth-tongued and deceitful, worked for a new alliance. So being grown up was this. A sordid tissue of intimate relationships, complicated and vile. No loveliness. No romance. She would have to live like this in her turn, be false, be hard, wear the same mask as her mother. She was alone in the drawing room now. They had gone upstairs. Mummy loud-voiced, shrill like a fishwife, common, for the first time. And Uncle John, pleading, protesting, dragging at her shoulder with ineffectual hands. "A Happy New Year! A Happy New Year!" Hands dragged at her, voices cried in her ear, and the band played loud and gay. It was a triumph, her party, an overwhelming success. "You're getting more like your mother every day. Isn't it wonderful for you both? Just like a couple of sisters." Nearly 12 o'clock, and the old year soon would die. Streamers were flung across the restaurant. Coloured paper littered the floor, twined round the feet of the riotous, jostling couples. There was not a square inch of space upon the floor, bodies pressed against each other, hot, perspiring, jigging up and down. "Happy New Year! Isn't it marvellous? Aren't you loving it?" someone screamed in her ear. She tried to smile back, but she felt every smile was forced and every message insincere. They knew, these people. They knew about Mummy and Uncle John. They had known for years. And now they waited for the next step in the game. The first jealous looks, the first signs of rivalry, laughing behind their hands.
Of course, they share him.
They stood in a circle, joining hands. Mummy, she, and Uncle John.
Should old acquaintance be forgot?
His voice rang loud above the rest. He smiled at Mummy, sleek and smooth. The perfect tabby cat.
Happy New Year, darling,
he said. And then, when the circle broke, he turned to the daughter. He murmured in her ear.
It's all right. I've calmed her down. She believes our story. You and I will manage it somehow, baby. But listen, we've got to slow down for a bit. Damn slow.
Tame Cat by Daphne du Maurier was read by Morven Christie. It was abridged by Richard Hamilton and produced by Lucy Collingwood. Tame Cat is part of The Doll, collection of short stories by Daphne du Maurier, which is published by Virago.